Well, well, thanks very much, Tom, and I look forward to the discussion in the panel just after. So we're back to Peter Stevens, who was with us yesterday. Peter's going to talk about digital identity and the importance of that. Now, India has introduced this identity card for hundreds of millions of people, and one of the things we don't think about if we are in the sort of upper income or even the middle class is the importance of identity. And 1 billion people on the planet don't have a formal identity in terms of papers which can get them a bank account and so on. So I think actually having an identity documents is a huge part of inclusion in a modern society. But actually identity also comes with privacy challenges and who owns your identity. And Peter is going to address this question. So over to you, Peter.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, sorry, a bit loud. Bit of deja vu to be back up here unexpectedly. So yeah, as said, I want to talk a little bit about identity and specifically start with talking about some of the issues we have with the way identity is managed at the moment and how that's going to become increasingly a problem as we become more and more digital. And then to talk about a model, it's not necessarily the only model, but a model that we're looking at when we study sort of decentralized options of how we could potentially improve this. So, looking at identity today. Identity and the way we manage it hasn't really changed for hundreds of years. It's still, even though we're in an increasingly digital world, we are still using the same model of physical certified documents produced by trusted authorities. Now, in the digital world, this is becoming increasingly problematic because it's slow, it's expensive to create and recreate these documents. And you don't actually want to give these documents away. You don't actually send your passport off. So you take a copy of it and send that, and that makes it very open to fraud. It's quite easy to fake a photocopied document. Then you get really obscure and strange processes coming up around digital businesses, where you've got an entirely digital business, especially in regulated environments like banking, where there has to be some sort of face-to-face meeting before you can use your digital service. And then these documents are fairly blunt as well. They can cause sort of privacy, leakage of personal information. Take the sort of common example of, I'm just in my early 20s, I want to go and buy a bottle of wine from the grocery store, but I need to prove how old I am. If I use either my passport or my driving license, I'm actually exposing quite a lot of very sensitive data about me, which may not be used fraudulently, but you are exposing it to the clerk in the grocery store. So there are new digital identity services popping up as we move, and a lot of these are around the big digital platforms, the guys who are actually competing now to own our personal data. And that's fairly scary comment, the fact that they're competing to own us. So what is it that we actually need from identity management? Well, sort of 3 key areas. We want our identity to be kept secure. We want to be in control of it, and we want it to be able to move around across the various services. The reason we need to be able to prove our identity is because we want a service and somebody wants to know something about us before they'll give us that service. So we need to be able to move that around fairly seamlessly. So the first sort of model that comes out is that sort of centralized model, and that has resulted in lots of islands of data, silos of your personal data, locked up in various organizations. You've no idea where your data's gone. You can't remember who you gave what to, and it all sort of gets out of sync. You know, have I updated my address with this company and this company and this bank and with this department of the government? It seems to be your problem to make sure that all organizations and departments have got your latest information. And the problem with this is then you sort of get the power all resides with the organizations that are holding your data. And it sort of tends towards a sort of monopolistic tendency, where they start to monetize your data. And don't forget, it's your data. So the federated model starts to get a little bit better, and that's the sort of things that Google and Facebook and Microsoft are trying to produce. But you've still got reliance on one organization still effectively owning you and really your place in the world. So if you fall out with that company or there is an issue, then you can find yourself without an identity. And the other thing that's been talked about a little bit over the last couple of days is that, the cliche that data is the new oil. It's incredibly valuable data. The most valuable data and most sensitive data is your personal data. And people don't seem to grasp that. People give it away willy-nilly. And companies grasp this because some of the richest companies on the planet are rich because they've gathered so much personal data up and they're using that and monetizing it. You have no idea really what's going on. So how do we get more control of that? And that's what we're going to discuss in a moment. But from a company perspective, it's not all great owning personal data, actually. It's becoming a liability. So some companies monetize it very well. Some of the big internet companies are exceptionally good at monetizing data. But for the rest of us, we actually collect a lot of data about our customers, but it's starting to become a liability. There are very high-profile hackings going on which destroy your reputation, or even worse, they can, with the new European General Data Protection Act, they can have quite substantial fines of up to $20 million per breach. I think per breach almost means per customer that gets breached, or 4% of your revenue. This is across industry, across the world. If you have a European customer, you're liable to protect their data under the European Data Protection Act. Doesn't matter what industry you're in. And that's significant. So for companies, if they can turn this around and have to own less of the data, just what they need to fulfill whatever service, that's better for them as well. So we're having a bit of an identity crisis. In the modern world, we're getting great at communicating, great at transacting online, but we're still not very good at managing who we are and being able to share that and look after it. Already said, identity is not secure enough. There's constant news about big hacking incidents. It's very redundant. So you've got data all over the place. I won't do a poll, but I very, very much doubt you could tell me right now where your address is, where your date of birth is, just the most core pieces. And so how would you then update them when you change, maybe not your date of birth, but maybe your address, when you change your address? How do you make sure everybody's got that up to date? And part of the reason for this fragmentation is because there's a lack of standards out there. So they're not able to communicate. They're not able to keep in sync. So the last 2 points are the ones that are really the fundamental problem, which is we don't control who we are. We don't control our information. That probably mattered less when we lived in a very much paper-based world, but as we become increasingly digital, the fact that we're completely out of control of all of this information is a real issue. And then the final part is it isn't universal. As was just said then, there's a lot of people without access to personal information and a validated identity, and that excludes them from various services. And where are we going? This is just going to get worse. So all of these are concepts and visions for the future that are coming at us thick and fast, and every single one of these will depend on having solid identity management underneath that works frictionlessly for you. Everything from hyper-individualization, where you get distinctly personalized services, digital services, through to social capital and your reputation, as we just heard, your reputation becoming very important and being able to give you access to various services, through to things like the trillion sensor economy. How do you interact with all of these machines and sensors that are out there if you can't validate who you are in a seamless digital way? So what we've been exploring, because we're exploring fairly decentralized models for doing business, is the concept of self-sovereign identity. So this puts you at the center rather than an organization. It puts you owning your data And you get validated claims from organizations such as governments and from banks, but also from your social feed and from maybe small companies you work with or even clubs. You know, you can prove that you're a member of a local rugby club. So this allows you, to the granular level, to be able to share just the pieces of data you need to share, and maybe not even share them in their rawest form. So maybe to open a bank account, I actually need to give my name, my date of birth, and various other pieces of information, and give them in the absolute form. But if I'm going to go to buy that bottle of wine from the grocery store, I don't even need to give the date of birth. I can just give some sort of validated claim, maybe validated by a company that people trust or a government, to say, I am over 18. That's all you need to know. You just need to know I'm over 18 and I can have that bottle of wine. So that then enables people to take control. They can own their own identity, they can build their own identity, they can make sure it doesn't get compromised. So the interesting thing, because identity is such an important security threat for us, the decentralizing idea of not having a database with 150 million records that's a real honeypot for hackers, but instead just having one device with one person's information on it, it's not quite the same, but the level of effort that a hacker would have to put into compromising that one record is about the same that they would have to put into compromising the 150 million record database. So the economics suddenly become unviable for the hacker, you know, because for a start, you've got to make sure you're going after the right person. So it actually makes the world more secure, and it makes it a lot harder for these breaches to happen. So you own your own data. You can share these things automatically because you keep a history, an audit history of who you've shared what information with. You get the choice to revoke that information. So if you're using particular information to get transactions, if you decide to terminate your relationship with a particular business, or in fact with just another human being, you can revoke access to that information. So you get control. But also, when you make the update once, I change my address, and it gets pushed out to everybody who needs my address, who I've already permissioned. It becomes a seamless experience and very, very positive. From businesses' perspective, as we were saying, personal data is becoming toxic. So actually, while they may want to use some data for marketing, and in fact you may even permission them to use some data for marketing, if they can hold as little as possible and just go to get it when they need it, then it puts them in a situation where they're less likely to have regulatory breaches. They have to invest less in securing this very, very treasured data, and potentially even provide some new revenue sources for certain trusted companies who would like to sort of be that company who attests that you are over 18 and provide that service and allow you to sell it to other people. So we have the technology already to do this. Blockchain distributed ledgers, secure digital certificates, and just these things. Phone in your pocket with a secure enclave in the middle. We have all the technology required to do this, but there's still some challenges. Because fundamentally, we are turning it on its head and inverting the control, going from the companies to the individual. And when you do stuff like that, you have big questions around governance, legal, regulatory framework. Especially when you start to get into the identity world, you start to bring governments in and national regulators. And so there's always some sort of political bake-off between jurisdictions, and we already have issues with cross-border data flow. But that all happens. But I think probably more interestingly, the societal issues, the challenges to this sort of thing at the bottom. The first one is education. Are people even aware that there's a real issue around their personal information? Quite frankly, the amount of information that is just given away to big tech companies, I think it's fairly clear that people aren't. And people are only really get bothered about this when there's some sort of tragic data identity theft incident. And I don't know how many people who've had an identity theft incident, and they're now in the many, many millions, but when they happen, they can be utterly catastrophic and can ruin people's lives. But until they happen, people sort of ignore it. It'll never happen to me. But the final point is another interesting one. It's great to talk about self-sovereignty and giving power to the individual. The problem is there's a large part of our population that either may not have the technology, and that's possibly less of an issue because we are talking about a technology identity. So if you're going to be using digital services, you probably have something like a phone. But it's actually, do you have the capability? What about the very, very young? What about the very old, the infirm, or just the technophobe? Are they going to be able to cope with managing this themselves? So you've got this balancing act between having somebody else do it for you and losing some of your personal freedoms, or getting personal freedoms and then finding people can't do it. So where are we going to go with this? Well, we actually think that this model will probably get borne out first in the machine-to-machine world, because they don't have so many of those problems. There's less politics involved with machines. There's less personal issues. You don't have machines that can't cope with technology, generally. So we think that it's going to become increasingly important as we start to head towards the 50 billion machine economy, connected machine economy, that these will all have identities, and they will own their own identity, and we will learn from that. And hopefully, they can lead us forwards such that people can start to use this self-sovereign model going forwards, and we don't have to necessarily experiment with individuals first. So that was just a little bit of a food for thought, just to talk about the future of where we're going with identity. So hand it over to the panel.